Hey guys, I just wanted to go over a couple practice questions. On Google Classroom, you'll see the assignment here. What you're going to do is there's like 18 practice questions. This is the 2019 version of the test. So a couple of the items we don't test on anymore, and that's why I said don't do 9, 16, 17, or 18. But you'll click the Students and Families link here, click on the Bicycle with Training Wheels to launch the testing program. So this is what the end-of-course test will look like. You'll have a code to put in here and your student ID number to put in to click sign in. On the practice site, obviously, you don't have to do those things. Then you'll select your grade level. The government test is an 11th grade test, so even if you're not an 11th grader, if you're taking the gov test, that's the one you click. Obviously, the practice system has all the tests in here. You'll only see American Government's 2021 Test 1 and Test 2. We're going to do the practice 19 questions here. So you'll click on Spring 19 release items. These are all the different tools that you have in the testing suite. You're going to just leave those settings as is. You can select different voices you want to hear. If you want to use the screen reading software, just click I hear the voice, even if you don't hear the voice, so that you can go ahead and start the practice test. So there are no extended response on the Gov end of course test. It is all either multiple choice or what they call simulation questions, which are essentially just remixed version of matching sections that you probably had on tests in the past. They're not really any more difficult. It's more just kind of getting yourself familiar with how they're laid out and how you interact with them. So on the first set of questions here, they're just multiple choice questions. Within the testing window, let me drag this down here. You can see here you do have the ability to zoom in and zoom out, so you can make the text bigger if you're having trouble reading it. You do have a way to isolate lines, and you can just move through them with the arrow keys. So if you're having trouble focusing, you can use the line reader tool as well. As I said, there are no extended response questions, but there is a note-taking section if you want to jot things down. Since there's no extended response typing questions, you can hit save when you're done with each question if you're feeling kind of paranoid about getting your scores recorded. But on the multiple choice ones, every time you enter an item, it does record it. So for the first question here, it's simply asking you the relationship between the 15th Amendment and the 24th Amendment. And since the 24th Amendment dealt with barriers to voting, by banning poll taxes, the correct answer here would be D, removing economic barriers that may have prevented African Americans from voting. Next question here is on essentially what did the 12th Amendment do? They give you the context of the 12th Amendment in the election of 1800, and they ask how did it change it? Correct answer there was A, electors vote for candidates for president and then candidates for vice president separately. Having the original Constitution essentially incentivized that the vice president plot the downfall of the current president probably wasn't their best idea, and it makes sense why that was quickly changed. Again, just to show you that it's not really trying to test memorization so much as it's trying to test interpretation. So for this one, they're talking about the necessary and proper clause, and they actually give you what the necessary and proper clause says. They just want to know, why did maybe the Federalists think this was an important clause to add in the Constitution? And the correct answer was that it allows the national government to efficiently run the country. It gives them more flexibility in how they govern. For 4, so this is our first simulation question, but again, it's essentially a matching question. On past tests you've taken, in class and pencil and paper in past years, this would have simply been like letters that you would have had to put onto specific lines or into different boxes. So you've got a column here for state government and a column here for local government. They want you to put the opportunities that fit into the appropriate boxes. So attending a city or township trustee meeting, that would be something you'd do at the local level. Serving in the National Guard, that's something you do at the state level. Organizing the neighborhood watch, that's a local level. Voting for governor, that's a state level question. The nice thing here is you can earn partial credit. If you had maybe put one item in the incorrect column, but the item that you did have there was still correct, you would get 1 point for this column, but 0 points for this column. So it is a 2-point question if you have both items in both boxes correct. All right, this is a highlighting question, so they give you a passage and they're looking for you to highlight the appropriate information from the passage. They're looking for items that they feel are categorized as consensus building activities in this passage. So two groups propose different tax plans. Group A suggests abolishing the state income tax and implementing a higher state regulated tax. Group B, on the other hand, advocates a lower income tax and a higher property tax. To rally support among both groups, A and B, Group A representatives conduct town hall meetings. That's consensus building. In addition, Group A ran an extensive grassroots campaign to encourage widespread support from across the state. Meanwhile, Group B representatives survey various state officials about their tax plan preferences. So the second statement you would need to highlight here is, in addition, Group A ran extensive grassroots campaigning, because that is also consensus building. The reason that this is not a consensus building statement is because they only talk about state officials here, and that's not a large enough spectrum of people that you're trying to bring together on an issue. Another multiple choice question, very straightforward. What's the 23rd Amendment? The growing population of Washington, D.C. Helpful way to remember that. 23 and D.C. both rhyme. 13, 14, and 15 address issues in the United States after the Civil War by enacting a series of changes in society. Identify the issue that each excerpt addresses and the amendment. So this is another 2-point question. First, you get a point for correctly identifying both issues, and then you get a point for correctly identifying both amendments. There's no reason that you have to answer this question in the flowchart way. So if you look at this passage here, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdictions thereof, and you know, oh, that's the 14th Amendment, you can answer that first. The right to citizens to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous state of servitude. Oh, that's the 15th Amendment. In fact, that was a question from just a few ago. So you know that one. Then you can go back and say, well, the 15th Amendment's about voting, the 14th Amendment's about citizen rights, and then you can complete the chart. So there's no order you need to complete these in. It's just that you need to have the chart completed when you're done. For this question, there's actually two possible correct answers, because part A just asks you to pick one of these two boxes, and then that determines how you answer B and C. So if you picked expansionary under fiscal policy, you then under B have to say what expansionary actions the government will do with spending, and you would say they would increase it. And what do they do with taxes in an expansionary policy? They decrease them. Had you picked contractionary policy, then you would have selected decrease and increase respectively. Both answers would have been correct. We're skipping 9, as that's no longer tested. Which statement summarizes the original Federalist position on the Bill of Rights? James Madison was pretty clear that he thought a Bill of Rights was unnecessary because the states already have those protections, and the Constitution is limited to prevent abuses of individual rights. This may sadly be one of the areas that James Madison might have been the most incorrect in, because we've seen even with the Bill of Rights, there have been times in our history where the government has gone out of its way to abuse those powers. 11 is just, what is the 13th Amendment? It abolished slavery and involuntary servitude. 12. Following the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus the Board of Education, African American students began applying to colleges and universities that had previously been segregated. In 1963, the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, who is historically a well-known jerk, tried to physically stop 3 African American students from registering at the University of Alabama. President Kennedy ordered the Alabama National Guard to force Wallace to move aside and allow the students to register. Why did President Kennedy take this action? Well, he took this action because George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, the head of its executive branch, is not following a federal Supreme Court ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education. So the correct answer there was B. That's not even the first time it was done. Dwight Eisenhower did something very similar. He called in the 101st Airborne Paratroopers to walk the Little Rock 9 to and from class every day for a year when Little Rock High School integrated those 9 students. So it was not the first time that a federal executive had stepped in to enforce the law that specifically. 13, the Federal Reserve purchases and sells government securities, adjusts the reserve requirement, and adjusts the discount rate to produce certain economic outcomes. What is one outcome the Federal Reserve might want to produce when purchasing government securities? So they're buying government securities, they're buying those bonds for cash, and those bonds will then stay in the Federal Reserve, and that cash goes out into the economy. So by putting that cash out into the economy, they're going to be fostering an economic expansion. 14, separating powers is the defining principle of U.S. government. Identify some of the powers reserved for the judicial branch. They don't tell you how many to use. They don't tell you if there's 1, 2, or 3, but there's 3 spaces here. First is obviously they're going to interpret the law, they're going to sentence offenders, and they're going to establish judicial procedures. And lastly, for this one, what you're doing is they tell you each column will have 2 boxes highlighted in it. So for the first column, you want to change a local ordinance to fight parking fines. The second column, you want to change a state policy on teacher salaries. And the third column, you want to change federal tax law. These are all different ways you could go about addressing those issues. They want you to pick the ones that are appropriate to the governmental level. So for the first column, local issues might be fixed at speaking at a public meeting or helping a council member run their campaign if they're going to adjust their policies to the way you want them to see adjusted. At the state level, holding a demonstration at the state capitol or lobbying members of the state legislature. And at the national level, testifying before Congress or writing a letter to Congress are ways that you might try to create those changes in public policy. So as you can see, they're not overly challenging questions. It's more about making sure you take the time to read the materials that they provide to you and then give the correct interpretation. Again, the goal here is just don't let the test beat you. The information is stuff that you have seen before. It's just making sure that you're answering these questions in the way and, not being intimidated by the way they are presented. So once you have finished taking the practice test and watched this video, make sure that you click Turn In for the assignment on Google Classroom, and I'll give you 5 points completion for having gone through this. Have a good day. Good luck on the test tomorrow.